2 pockets. Thanks, Chris. Okay, well, it's good. Well, I feel like I'm in the, we drove up from the fringe of the Fescue belt. I mean, way down about as far southeast as you can go. If you drop below us about an hour and a half, you're on the coastal plain and Fescue disappears. And I feel like I'm right in the thick of, if we're talking about toxic tall Fescue, I'm in the thick of enemy country right here. And if we had a better basketball team, I'd feel that way too, but we're not even on the radar of Kentucky. So let's talk a little bit about, hopefully Jeff convinced you that it's well, Craig convinced you of the sins of toxic tall Fescue. Jeff convinced you that it can be economical to renovate, and now we're going to show you a few options how. And it's been interesting. I missed the Missouri meeting yesterday, but it's been interesting in the other 4 meetings that I've attended and spoken at. You pick up different pieces of talks when they're given by different people, or even by the same people. You hear the same jokes, but you get different little snippets of information. So we're gonna go through that, and I'm jotting down those notes as we go to add to my talk as well for next year. But we've got 3 sections of this talk, and I'll go fairly quickly so we've got time for questions. I'm excited about this group. We've got a lot of great questions, actually. We're going to go through 4 methods of establishment. Really 3. We'll touch on tillage at the end. We'll have a few slides on establishment problems, troubleshooting, things to watch out for, and just as importantly as how to get it planted and how to get a good stand is how to keep that stand. And that first year management is critical to establishing a good deep root system going into the summer, trying to minimize competition from warm season weeds or Bermuda grass, and keep that stand. If you're going to invest almost $300 an acre, according to the last presentation, we want it to be there. So one thing we didn't talk about, and I've jotted down in my notes, and I noticed you've got a spray handout on the back table. Prioritizing those pastures are important. You saw the thin pastures is an important thing to consider. Another thing to consider if you're going to use that 25% acreage is if you've got a specific area you like to breed or need to breed next to working pens, if you're doing timed AI, that should be a consideration. And another big important consideration when we're talking about management this first year is being able to fence those cattle off and control grazing going into that first summer. So those are 3 things to keep in mind as you're running through these pastures or potential pastures in the back of your head. All right, so let's go through the 4 methods, really 3 methods, but we'll again touch on tillage. These slides will all have the same format. We've got the typical 2/3, 1/3 tall fescue growth curve that you all have seen, going back to when Gary Lacefield was a 27-year-old assistant professor. You've probably seen this curve over the last 30 or 40 years, and yield here, and we'll build on each of these 3 different 4 different renovation methods as we go through. So we'll add to these slides, and this is the spray-smother-spray method, spray-summer-smother-spray plant method. This is the Cadillac, the gold standard, right? This is the one this goes back to the preferred method when endophyte free fescues were released. We wanted to wipe that slate clean and start with 100% stand, and we still want that. We still want all the toxins gone and a clean stand established. So this is a very dependable method and one that gets you there. The first spray is in spring, and this is something that it's going to wipe out that toxic fescue, and it's important to put this out before viable seed production. It kills the old stand. It picks up some. You're not going to pick up the henbit and those late winter annual weeds, but you're going to pick up some of the early summer weeds typically when you go in here. And depending on what you've got, if you've got a bunch of summer annual broadleaf weeds, you may want to work with your forage specialist or your county agent to figure out what broadleaf you can put on to get those weeds and not interfere with your summer annual. So we do that, we kill that, and typically we'll no-till in a summer smother crop. In our area, it would almost, not exclusively, but very often would be a dwarf pearl millet. I think sorghum Sudan and Sudan grasses are probably a little more common here. But a good, highly productive summer smother crop is typically no-till drilled into here for summer grazing. Oftentimes this is at not a full rate of seed to allow some light to get down to those surviving tall fescue plants and promote growth so that we can pick them up later in the summer with this second spray. And that second spray also is important. You're going to graze this smother crop, possibly hay it, depending on your situation, and then come in with a second spray, typically a non-selective spray like Roundup, glyphosate, and that's going to pick up these escape tillers of tall fescue, toxic tall fescue, which are there. You haven't completely eliminated those, almost certainly. There's skips and other things. Help clean up those summer weeds, and just as importantly, terminate that summer smother crop. So you want that sorghum Sudan grass to be killed and wiped out. Important to manage the residue of this summer smother crop. You don't want a lot of material out there to no-till drill this tall fescue, which you typically go in right after that second spray and no-till drill in. So that's one of the problems Nick and I had in that weight spray problem. We had this as a check, as our standard, and a lot of times we would have a lot of pearl millet. We use pearl millet. We'd have a lot of stemmy residue that was hard for that no-till drill to cut through. So we ended up with a lot of skips. So manage this residue of the smother crop either with a hay cut or good intensive stocking to manage that residue. Again, this is the gold standard. This is the most expensive, but it produces a whole lot. Well, this is after that first spray. The advantage of this is it produces a whole lot of really high quality forage in a time of year when Craig showed you this is what the Missouri pastures look like without the glyphosate going into the summer in Mount Vernon. So there are some real advantages to this, particularly if you're short of summer forage. Very high quality, very good stuff. If it rains, if you get it in, and if you get fertilizer on it, there's some risk involved, but good. Another good thing that this system has, and again, these are these things that I'm picking up on over the week. If you've got a producer or you're a producer who's not real familiar with no-till drill operation, this gives you a dry run. You know, you've got an opportunity to work with that drill, get familiar with it, calibrate it for a different species, of course, but you're going to use that drill. Now, of course, you've got to rent that drill twice, fix what's broken on it twice, and clean it up and get it running twice. But this is a good opportunity to get a trial run with that drill. Questions on the spray, summer smother spray method? Kind of the gold standard. I've gotten to where I've warmed to this method over the years. I used to be a pretty hardcore, shortcut. Yeah.
And I may have missed it. When you spray in the spring, you're spraying all.
Yes.
You recommend? Well, I might as well say what we do. We'll spray it and then wait about 10 days and spray again for the drill. That is too bad. That's the root mass and stuff.
Breakdown.
Success rate with warm season.
I'd agree with that. Yeah. So the comment and comment really, which I appreciate, is after this first spray to wait 10 days or so. They spray a second time to clean up skips, that's fine. You're going to get them here, but that 10 days, 2 weeks allows those the top growth to break down and the roots. You're going to have a lot better seed bed to drill into. Totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. And that's another advantage of that spray weight spray in the fall. You've got a 4 to 6 week window for a lot of that to break down too. Really good point. We have not used any residual product. We've used glyphosate. We tried paraquat. We tried several. Nick and I did some preliminary work. Everything we've done has been glyphosate oriented. Systemic but no residual. So we have in certain situations added some broadleaf weed killer that does have some residual activity. You've got to be careful with that with the summer annuals. Watch the label pretty closely. And make sure I've seen some stand failures of summer annuals with high rates of picloram and 2,4-D that we suspect are herbicide related. So be careful with the broadleaf labels with that. We have not. No, haven't used any atrazine. Okay, so all right, this is a method I wasn't real familiar with until a couple years ago. We started doing these presentations, and we've actually used it a few times in our area. This is not common in South Carolina anyway, but it's a variant of that spray-smother-spray, a winter smother method. So instead of starting here in the spring, you back that up, and you'll start in the fall, and we'll fall plant. So it's a 1-year cycle. I don't like spring planting. Don't recommend spring planting. Maybe a little different here, but you're setting yourself up for disaster in South Carolina with a fescue spring planting of fescue. So, but this is a fall planting. It's a 1-year cycle. No seed heads. You know, if you miss your window here in the spring with seed heads and don't kill this fescue or suppress these seed heads, this is your option. So spray in the fall, which kills it out fully. Plant a winter smother crop for grazing or baleage or hay production. What would these smother crop options be in this area? Wheat, rye. We would use oats. We've actually got a crop of barley in now for baleage for our dairy, using this same method to eventually convert to a novel. One thing I would avoid, the one no, is annual ryegrass if you're going to plant a fall smother crop, and it's very tempting because in this cartoon we're not going to plant a smother crop, and that ryegrass is going to come on out well into the summer. The bad thing is that ryegrass is going to produce a whole lot of seed here, which has excellent seedling vigor and is going to be a pretty bad weed the following fall. So avoid annual ryegrass in these situations. You know, have a ball with any of the small grains, but don't put out annual ryegrass. Incidentally, some of this advice comes from what my county agents like to call street cred. That means I've made the mistakes, and you can learn from them. We've tried a lot of shortcuts in these methods, and every shortcut we try seems to end up in heartaches. So follow the recipes. Your farm varies a little bit, but don't tweak these much. Don't tweak these much. First spray, kill the old weeds. Use that smother crop. Go in with a second spray, and then you're going to lay fallow and third spray. This is a Craig Roberts slide, and then plant the novel. In our area, possibly yours, Chris, we would have the opportunity to go back in with a short season summer smother crop. I suspect you would here too. So you can add a summer smother crop. Further increased costs, but that summer forage is really valuable in our cases. I've gotten hooked, and I think others do as well. When you get into these smother crop systems, a lot of times these stay in smother crops for a couple years before the novel eventually gets planted. They're just, you realize all of a sudden those input costs are paying off. So comments on that? I've got a couple slides on it from Missouri, the Davis Farm in Brookfield, Missouri, where they use this winter smother method. Sprayed out the fescue in September, added cereal rye. Again, that's a good point. That's 7 days later, kind of getting to your point. Began that grazing in early November, and also cut some for dry hay throughout the spring. So good. This is one of the problems with the rye. It gets away. We use the example, it's kind of like trying to steer a bottle rocket in April and May. It takes off and goes. But harvested for dry hay in mid-May, and again pulled off good yields of decent quality forage. So questions or comments on winter smothers? Again, avoid ryegrass. That's my important point. Yes, sir.
What they didn't mention, brassica,
yeah, I have. We've used pure brassicas. I haven't mixed them. Should work well for winter grazing. Yes. So.
Is there any preference? All our grass straight up to that. Is there any preference as far as
don't use the fourth method. Don't use tillage. I think any good no-till any good no-till practice is the important thing is to have roots and cover would be my take. I would prefer probably this in our area, and we've got steep Piedmont soils, clay soils. If I were really worried about erosion and we're on steep hillsides, this fourth method, this spray weight spray, you've got probably the least opportunity for erosion. You know, you've got about a 6-week period where you've got dead fescue on it, but you're establishing a new stand of fescue on it. So possibly I would steer to this third method. But really good production practices, those summer annuals come up quick, get going, and they're there. And you're going to leave good root mass behind when you terminate that and drill in. So Chris, you got any comments, or anybody else have comments on? I don't think they would matter. Just avoid tillage. So this spray weight spray method, this is one that Nick and I kind of refined at Georgia too long ago to admit now, when I was a forage specialist there. And the key here was we wanted to eliminate that summer smother crop. Craig and I did a survey in 05, 06 about, you know, there wasn't a lot of novel fescue adoption at that time. And one of the biggest reasons was the renovation method was complicated. That's one of the top reasons that kept coming back when we surveyed forage specialists, county agents, and producers. It was in the top 2 or 3. So we wanted to find a way to eliminate or simplify the renovation, the spray-smother-spray procedure. And that's this procedure. And it involves really 3 steps. And the first step is important. It's to not allow viable seed to be produced the spring before planting. We're going to do almost all of the work here in the fall within a 6-week window of our planting. But the important thing is don't allow viable seed to be formed in the spring. And that involves bush hogging in the spring, clipping those seed heads to prevent viable seed from producing. And some of the work at Auburn from back in the old endophyte-free days indicated that endophyte is not viable 18 months after it's produced. So if we can keep seed from being produced here, any seed that was there from last year that was infected with the endophyte is dead, or the endophyte's dead. So if we can clip here and plant here, we should have a clean slate, right? We shouldn't have any viable seed, any viable endophyte infected seed. There'll be weed seed there. Look at your calendar, look at your planting period, and when your target planting date is, back up 4 to 6 weeks, preferably 6. So work backwards and apply that first application of glyphosate. 1.5 quarts is what we recommend. That's kind of a bare minimum. If you've got other weeds, you might want to bump that up a little bit. I think the last label I read was 1.25 gallons, 5 quarts an acre a year. But back up 6 weeks. I'll show you why here in just a bit, and give that first spray. That kills the toxic fescue, most of it. 4 to 6 weeks later, preferably 6, hit it a second time, and that's going to get any seedlings that come up, whether they're ryegrass or winter annual weeds, is what you're going to pick up here, and escape tillers. That 6-week period in our environment was surprising. It wasn't necessarily for cleaning, although we did get escape tillers. It killed a lot of little seedlings we didn't even know were there. So we got to the next spring and you could pick out every 6-week plot. It was clean. It was fescue. And all the other plots, we had a 2-week interval, was full of henbit and other junk. So it allowed us to skip a spring broadleaf application. Okay. Really, that 4 to 6 weeks is important here. And then you go in and no-till your novel right into this after the second spray. And you've had 4 to 6 weeks to break up most of that. We actually planted, the label says 24 hours. I'm on tape, but we planted the day we sprayed. We let it dry and we tilled and had good stance. I got an experimental herbicide license. I'm legal, actually. So in Missouri, they compared these 2 methods, the old Cadillac method, spray-smother-spray, with the spray-weight spray. Very similar stands of new fescue, very little escape old fescue, and similar bare ground. These aren't different, and ours are actually kind of flip-flopped because we had some skips with the the pearl millet that we had trouble with the drill in. So these compare very well, very well. Just a few photos. I'm not promoting any method, but again, this method fits some producers. This second spray is important. You'll look across the field. I took that photo out. You'll look across the field and it looks dead. But if you get down on what Carl Hovland called your prayer bones and look at things, there's tillers in here that are green and clumps of plants that are green, and you'll see some skips later that you'll pick up. So the second spray is important. Cheap insurance. This is what it looks like. We got a little more favorable spring, I'm sure, but this is about this time of year now. Hardwoods hadn't leafed out, but the pines have. Good spray weight spray, flash grazing with a group of heifers on that. And we have burned some residue before planting and sprayed again. So there's little variance to this that you can use. This was a producer's farm that actually ended up in the publication. He renovated 6 or 7 different pastures for us in slightly different ways. And Nick went in and resampled these pastures, and all of the spray weight sprays had half to a little over 2% toxic escapes. And the 2% I probably should just quit saying that, but the 2% typically ended up in corners and areas where he didn't get a good spray. But very, very low contamination of toxic. It's a method that works for us. It's an option. Those are 3 good options. Here's the 4th option that I add, and that's a prepared seed bed. And we've been asked this question over and over, all the 4 that I've been at, and probably yesterday at Missouri too. They ask, how do we do this without herbicides? And the answer is, I don't know. But tillage is not going to kill all those toxic tall fescue plants. Someone said it just kind of makes it mad. I know it does with Bermuda grass, and I think toxic tall fescue would be the same. It would take multiple tillage to get it cleaned up. But we have used prepared seed beds. That's typically with an initial glyphosate application and then tillage to get a good kill and then till. The reason we've tilled is this is that same farmer. Here's a clean till on this side and the spray weight spray. You can see the skip after the first spray. Important to pick up. Check your nozzles, calibrate your sprayer, the whole 9 yards. This is an important operation. This farmer used clean till because he had a bunch of old steep terraces. This was steep Piedmont land, and he wanted the option to hay this, and he wanted to remove those terraces, and he knew it was going to be in pasture for the rest of his life. So he went in with tillage and smoothed this up, and planted into it. But it did have an initial herbicide application.
Sean, it looked like there was a lot of residue in that last photo. Is that going to interfere with the
We didn't burn this. He went right into it, and we got a good stand in this field. Drill, good coulters and a good no-till drill are imperative in that situation. There is a lot there, Chris. That's a good point. The field he burned was at his house, and it had a lot of residue on it, and he ran a fire across it when it looked like this, and then sprayed it again after a few weeks. But good seed soil contact and good coulters, and we typically are okay in fescue stands. Just a photo there. I'm not following my time. Keep me on track, Chris. A few establishment problems, and I'm just gonna. This is for your reference. These next couple slides. This came out of the old, good Kentucky reference here. When Mike Collins was at Kentucky, so a forager's guide here, the forager's textbook. I've got the problems here and potential issues underneath. Live seed does not germinate because, so you can use these as references. They germinate, but they die immediately. Here's why. Fertilizer or herbicide toxicity, crusted soil, didn't get it covered good, that type of thing. And then this is what we get the calls on. It came up and died. So that's another big one. pH and fertility are the 2 big ones in these. But we've summarized probably the most common ones here in a single slide. And I guess for the interest of time, we'll go to this summary. But here are the main reasons. I guess a David Letterman top 10, but there's not 10. a poor kill. We typically have well, it gets back to your point, to get good decomposition and a good environment where you get good seed soil contact and not a lot of competition from living fescue plants. We typically don't do, we always have producers that try to drill into thin stands of toxic fescue, and those typically don't work, and that shouldn't be done for other reasons as well. You always get the seed companies always get the blame. You know, if something doesn't come up, it was obviously bad seed, but that's a joke, seed companies. But we have Alliance approved seed, and Nick will go into that in detail right before lunch on how they're certifying that you have a certain percentage of living endophyte. You've got to remember, you're not necessarily buying seed. The seed is the delivery vehicle here. It's important to have a good variety, but what's most important is the endophyte that's in that plant, and it needs to be alive and there in a high proportion. So this is a value-added seed product where that seed is the delivery form of these endophytes, these non-toxic endophytes. A huge problem, here are our big ones: too deep, legume competition, soil fertility in our neck of the woods. We always see people plant too deep, and people get carried away with these no-till drills where I got to see dirt fly. You know, I've heard that phrase over and over. It's easy to get these too deep. You need to see some seed on top of the ground or you're too deep, and I'm sure Chris will go into this at length this afternoon. We have seen some carryover herbicide. I've already addressed that with some broadleaves. Leave the clover out when you plant that fescue. I'm a clover fan. I love red clover, white clover, and I think it should be in the stand. But when you plant the fescue is not the time to add it. Why would that be? Why wouldn't I add clover when I got the drill, right? Just put some clover in. What's the issue? Competition's huge. That's the biggest one. Those flat leaves are going to shade out that, and you think, oh, white clover is not that competitive. Yes, it is when you've got a seedling, a tall fescue seedling next to it. What's the other reason? There's one other one. You can't. You've eliminated your spring weed control. So that's really tough. That's one of those issues and that's one of these I'm going to add in my notes is spring weed control. A lot of times we'll need to clean up those weeds in the spring.
In organic operations, they don't like to do monoculture. I guess you can go back and cross-seed.
I would typically like to see that the next fall or the following spring. You could plant in the fall, plant your fescue in the fall, frost seed the following spring, or ideally the next fall is what I would prefer. But you could frost seed the next fall, the next spring, the spring after seeding. That at least gives it a little head start. Yeah, and probably include something like, I don't know, white clover versus red. Red's got a little better seedling vigor. That I may be splitting hairs there. So, and the last, soil fertility. That's a big problem with us. We got very acid soils in a lot of cases, and we see if they don't put lime out and put phosphorus out, we see the phosphorus is tied up, and we see purple seedlings that turn black and die. And so correct the pH, get your phosphorus up. We've either got way too much phosphorus with chicken litter, or we got the two extremes. But this is a problem in our area. I'm sure Kentucky farmers are better than mine. So, all right, don't spray when the field's dormant. If this is what it looks like in the fall, wait. There's some green there, but wait for a rain to get that flush, and you need green tissue to translocate that Roundup or glyphosate. Be aware of these seedlings. This is why that 6-week wait period is really important on that wait spray. We also need to pick these up with the summer smother crop. You've got these coming, and that's again why the ryegrass is less than desirable in these situations. I'm gonna skip through this really closely because I know Nick's covering it, but this logo on the seed bag addresses that seed quality issue, and there are assurances that come with this logo that you'll see later. The main thing is doesn't have toxic seed, and it's got a good living endophyte, a high amount of living endophyte, non-toxic endophyte in it. So there's the logo. There's the logo on a different seed company's tag. Calibrate the drill, not only for seeding rate, but particularly seeding depth and press wheel pressure and relief to avoid these skips. So, and manage that residue when it's needed. We do have issues with moisture at planting. Typically, it's this issue. It's been this year for us. I think you guys have been pretty wet as well. This, in my opinion, we've got a lot of opportunities in the southeast anyway this year. We have a lot of this, a lot of hay feeding and a lot of pugged up pastures that are screaming. You know, we've got high fertility hay feeding areas that are just destroyed. And this is a summer annual opportunity that should be followed with a novel fescue. So if you've got areas that look like this, you know, turn some wheels, punch some numbers, and figure out that may be a great candidate for novel endophytes. It's not where you want to feed hay next year. you got to find a different feeding place, but this could be a real opportunity for you. And of course, we talked about soil fertility. That's again, that's your neighbor, obviously. First year management, just a couple slides. I'm gonna skip. I'm gonna reorder these next year, guys. But in grazing situations, it's important not to overgraze and not to graze too long into the summer. So at the very first talk, John Fike at Virginia Tech said, you know, the endophytes, as you'll see in the management talk, the toxins in the toxic fescue are concentrated down toward the soil surface. Craig Roberts had a graduate student, did a great paper, published a great paper a couple years ago where they took sections as you go down the tall fescue plant, and as you got closer and closer to the base of that plant, the toxins concentrated. So when you remove those toxins, you don't have a break. They'll graze it right down into the ground. And when we did the early Max Q work at Calhoun, Georgia and Eatonton, Georgia, you could put 7 or 8 stocker steers on the toxic tall fescue and they wouldn't eat it. You know, they get sick. You had 3 on the Max Q or the non-toxic, and it was, you know, it was at 4 inches. So you don't have a break on this non-toxic, and you need a fence and a gate, and you need to operate that gate to keep them out, particularly going into summer. So watch the overgrazing. Ideally, this is the ultimate control, I guess, is consider haying it that first year if you have the option. You don't want to wait too long. You can undergraze, right? And you can wait too long to hay. What happens when the hay gets up this tall? You've got full seed heads on it, and you get a rain and a wind on it. Lays over, you can't pick it up. It's self-shading. That fescue gets real clumpy. So take the hay cutting on time and get it off of there so that these tillers can regrow and get ready and prepare for summer. Put some carbohydrates back down in those roots for summer survival. So cut the hay, cut it on time. I would rather have rained on hay in this situation, cut on time, than dry hay and clumpy fescue. You're managing the fescue here, not the hay. So in this first year, really, really important. Good drill rows here in this hay situation. So a really good practice just because there's so much control, but pay less attention to the weather and more to the shading of this fescue. Also cutting height. Cutting height is important. The reason I'm using a winter smother system on that and in the barley that I talked about earlier is because our farm crew has a disc mower and they don't like using the skid. So we scalped that fescue, went into in late May, went into a hot summer, and we ended up with very little fescue and a whole lot of crabgrass. So with this novel, the first year, make sure you cut it high. This is not alfalfa. This is fescue. We need to cut it high. Keep it clean, particularly the first year, but all years really. Here's a hay ring. This is from Dave Barker at Ohio State. Hay ring with what's that? toxic tall fescue coming up in the middle of that hay ring, right? So what do you have in this situation? You got tillage with cow hooves, you got fertility, and you got moisture, and you got toxic seed. That's a recipe for disaster. So watch the toxic hay feeding in your non-toxic areas. I'm not trying to make you paranoid. I'm just trying to make you think, right? So watch coming in these gate areas, and when you mow seed heads in the spring, blow off the bush hog before you pull into that field. So simple things. Okay, last slide. Good time. Last slide. All right, so just like you can move seed in on that bush hog, you can move them in cows, in theory. So those cows will strip the seed heads, and they can come in and deposit them in highly fertile, moist cow pies, right? So another good establishment method. But there's some Auburn work. Again, this is back to the end-of-fight free days where Steve Schmidt dosed some cows with tall fescue seed, and a graduate student who wasn't being paid nearly enough sifted the feces, counted seed, and germinated those out and counted in the infected seeds per cow per day. And here's what they came out. In 2 days, it's gone. And this equates to about 0.2 or 0.4 pounds an acre or something like that at a typical stocking rate. So, after a day or two, it's fine. If you've got a good vigorous stand of novel fescue, it's hard to get toxic seed in. It's this situation where you've got disturbance and space that you end up running with problems, and hopefully these are localized. That's my last slide. Questions? The donuts had you dozing off, and I must be in a monotone mode. Chris?
Would it be fair to say that before someone should consider novel identified tall fescue, they really have to have it through the system?
That's Matt and I were just talking about the 5 acres to 2 acres, how much that highlights the importance of managed grazing and intensive grazing. It's not a necessity, but it makes a lot more economic sense to have managed grazing and that. Jeff, comment? It's one benefit of this is not 50-cent seed. You need to take care of it. It's if you buy a new truck, you go as long as you can. You park in the back of the parking lot so nobody hits you. You need to take care of this seed. Yes, sir. Oh no, you can graze the following fall. No. In the summer, you need to be careful. In our area, you really need to be careful. It may be less so here, Craig or Chris or Ray. Yeah. Control, and you can graze in the summer. That producer grazed in the summer, on and off, flash grazing. Control grazing in this case is critical. Don't leave the gate open and grub it down all summer. That's the big thing. We've got so much Bermuda grass and crabgrass competition or potential for competition that first summer. It's important to have some height on it. It was somebody else. Yeah. Yeah. Some of Richard Watson and Jane Parrish's work was about a 25% increase in intake, I believe. Is that right? Did you have a comment, Jeff?
There was one question I wanted to follow up on about purity of paint. A little bit of that, but there was a question about if the quality was correct over time. You mentioned that
Oh, what we had to follow up on some surveys Nick and I did, we had 1% toxic seed in there, and the seed label is going to guarantee less than 5% off types. I don't know what they typically test, but you know, it's less than 5.
Don't provide opportunities for toxic seed to come back in. We established some pastures in 2001, 2 years ago. We were back in those. They hadn't really been used experimentally all that period. Now and stuff like that. We used them in another experiment 2 years ago. We retested to make sure that they were true to form. And toxic fall test that is still toxic. We identified pre-fall test that had a stand. The novel fall test that is still novel. So as long as you manage them right, they stay true to form.
That it doesn't. I don't know if Craig mentioned this, but it doesn't move in pollen. It has to be in the seed. In the seed. It's hard to, a viable seed with a living endophyte has to get in the field and get established before you get infection. So it's hard.
One last question, then we'll move on to race. Somebody earlier said something about will that take care of it'll make it mad, right?
We've been pretty successful with split rates up to like a 3 and 2 with a 6 week. Again, that's 6 week interval. You want it. I'm not a weed scientist, but you want it. That first spray, it needs to be up and going so that you get good translocation to the roots, and then you need a good long interval to pick up the return, which you're going to have. We've had good luck with 6 week intervals of heavy rates of Roundup on Bermuda grass in our area.
Weed scientists tell me that late summer, early fall, the Bermuda grass is storing its carbohydrates in its roots.
That's true.
And so the translocating things down into where the growing areas are, whereas the rest of the year it's putting it back out the other way. So
I would guess you would want to start like late July and follow up mid-August with that second rate, because it's putting reserves down. So I'll be around all day. Yeah, I'll be around all day. So. That's
all right, let's thank John for his presentation.